folks. How you doing out there? Chappie coming to you on a Tuesday here, back at Good Samaritan today. Wanted to share some things with you. Yesterday I had an interesting conversation while on the road. Was talking to some ladies, and they were asking what I did. I said, well, I'm an Anglican pastor. And of course, when you say Anglican, all the questions come, well, what is that? What is that? And as I start to just explain it, the lady's like, oh, it's like Lutheran. And I was like, well, yeah. And she said, those are the Lutherans that went to England and restarted the church in England. And I was like, well, no, not really. And as I tried to get back into the Protestant Reformation and explain that to her, she was like, oh yeah, Protestants. And she really couldn't pin down what the Protestant Reformation was, because she was like, oh, that was in the 1300s? And I was like, no. And she said, oh, the 1700s. I said, no. And then finally, oh, the 1500s, which is correct. So it kind of, I was kind of discouraged, because we, as Christians, sometimes we lack the understanding and knowledge of our actual history, our church history, which is extremely important. As you know, we look around our country today and we understand that there is a lack of knowledge of history, American history, and just history in general. And it's been diluted a lot in the schools. And I say that because even when I was going through school, we studied history, kind of in the classical context. And as we studied it, we would get to stuff like World War II, and we would just gloss over it. And we wouldn't even discuss what led up to it and then what came after it. And then the importance of knowing, how somebody in Germany duped an entire country into the Holocaust, for example. And if you don't know history and you forget history, as they say, history will tend to repeat itself. So having a good grasp on history helps us. It really does. It helps us avoid things and maybe learn from things for the future. So when it comes to church history, it's also very important that we know our history as Christians, from after the resurrection of Christ, the early church in Acts, and on into the ages, so to speak. Now, back when I was going through Bible college, my background was Assembly of God. And according to the Assembly of God, church history didn't start until like the early 1800s. So to them, they knew that Acts was the beginning of church history. But for some reason, after Acts, it's like the church ceased to exist on the face of this earth. Until 1800, when it was rediscovered and the whole charismatic Pentecostal thing was going through the church at that time. And if you know anything about Assembly of God, they are kind of a Pentecostal group. Well, that always disturbed me, because I'm like, well, you mean for like 2,000 some odd years, the church just stopped? It didn't do anything on the face of this earth? And that wasn't true. So as we got into church history, began to see the depth of what was going on early on in the church. The leaders of the early church were constantly bombarded with different heresies that were coming against the church and threatening the very existence of the church. And the danger there with heresies is when a heresy gets in, it is threatening the basic core beliefs of Christianity. And that was why it was so important for these early church leaders to fight the heresies and set the record straight on theology and doctrine, and not just doctrine, how everything relates to Christ and what Christ has done in our lives, which relates directly to the Great Commission. I want to encourage you, and I'm planning on talking about some of these heresies, because the heresies didn't go away. They were just squashed, but they live on today in many different expressions of Christianity to various extents. And it's important to recognize these, because it affects, again, how we see Christ and the work of Christ in our lives, and especially when it comes again to the Great Commission. Now, if you are interested in discovering a little bit of the church history, I've told you to read Acts. Acts is the early church, folks. But after that, the church just doesn't stop. It booms. It spreads throughout the world. And not only spreads throughout the world, but it's winning people to Christ. It's saving souls as it goes. And eventually it becomes, as we know, when Constantine was emperor of Rome, the actual religion of Rome. So it's important to realize and study what is going on and how that developed through the ages, all the way up to the Protestant Reformation, all the way into modern day. Now, one of the books that really, this is my actual textbook from my Bible college church history days. It's Gonzalez, The Story of Christianity. All right, I'll let you look at that, because if you can get a copy of this, it lays church history out very easy, very simple, very clear and concise, and kind of lets you know what was going on in the church. Now, he also has accompanying volumes to this set, The History of Christian Thought, which digs down deeper into what Christians were thinking back then, into the various philosophy and not just philosophy, but the theology of the times, and the fighting of the heresies that were coming against the church. It's critical that we know this stuff, folks. We should know our history so that we don't repeat it again and again and again, and we learn from it. So I want to encourage you. I know this isn't deep spiritual, but it's important. It's important. And actually, some of you might get into this and go like, wow, this is really neat stuff. This is really, now some of it, drags out like anything. Any type of history can just drag out. You're like, wow. But Gonzalez presents it very well as a story. And he's got 2 volumes to it. The first volume covers the early church to the dawn of the Reformation, and then the second book goes the Reformation into modern times here. And I think they've even updated it so that it's even closer to where we are today. So, folks, on Tuesdays, I'm thinking about touching on some of these different elements of church history and these different heresies that the church was facing. I kind of give a little educational side to what we do here as well. It's good to see you again. It's good to be back. Be good today and walk as lions.